I'd been working under her for almost a year, and in that time I'd learned two unshakable truths. She never missed a detail, and she never repeated herself. So when she leaned across her desk that afternoon, her eyes steady on mine, and said, "One more mistake, and you'll belong to me," it was the kind of sentence that stuck in the back of my throat like a stone. The words were sharp, deliberate, but there was something in the way she delivered them, something I couldn't pin down. Her tone wasn't raised, wasn't angry. If anything, it was quieter than usual, laced with a kind of precision that made me feel like she was measuring me, waiting to see how I would react. I laughed at first. What else could I do? A nervous, uncertain sound that broke too quickly in the silence of her office. I expected her to smirk, maybe soften the blow, but she didn't. She just kept watching me, her chin resting lightly against her hand, her dark eyes holding me still. There was no escape in that gaze. It carried weight, authority, but also something I couldn't name. Something that felt almost playful. The office light fell across her in a way I shouldn't have noticed, not as her employee. It caught strands of her hair, turning them to copper at the edges, and drew a faint glow across her skin. She was older, yes, but she carried her age with a kind of effortless grace that I'd never been around before. Everything about her was deliberate. Her clothes, her gestures, even the silences she let hang in the air. And yet, for all that control, her words unsettled me. Belong to me. I knew she meant it in a professional sense, a way of reminding me that my job, my future here, was in her hands. But there was a pause in her delivery, just long enough to make me wonder if she knew how else it could sound. I shifted in the chair, suddenly aware of how small her office felt, how close the two of us were. Her desk was the only barrier, but even that felt flimsy under the weight of her presence. My pulse picked up, and I hoped she couldn't see it in my face. Finally, she sat back, sliding a paper across the desk with one graceful motion. "Fix this. Tonight." Her voice had returned to its usual firmness, but the echo of that earlier warning still clung to me. I took the file, nodded, and forced myself to leave the office with steady steps. But as I walked down the quiet hall, the words replayed in my head over and over. "One more mistake, and you'll belong to me." I told myself it was nothing, just a figure of speech. But the truth was, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't before. Not just the fear of failing her, but the strange, magnetic pull of belonging. Not to the company, not to the work, but to her. And I couldn't decide if that terrified me, or if it was exactly what I wanted. The next few days were a blur of deadlines and meetings, but no matter how much work piled up, I couldn't get her words out of my head. "One more mistake, and you'll belong to me." She never brought it up again. That was the strange part. She moved through the office with her usual calm authority, her heels clicking steadily down the halls, her voice measured and precise in every meeting. To anyone else, nothing had changed. But to me, everything had. I found myself hyper-aware of her presence. The way she slid a file across the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper a moment before mine did. The way she adjusted her glasses when she was thinking, tapping them gently against her lips before setting them aside. I'd seen her do it 100 times, but suddenly it felt charged, as though I was seeing her for the first time. Whenever she corrected me in meetings, her words were sharp but never cruel. Still, I caught myself noticing the faint softness that lingered beneath her tone, as if she expected me to learn, not to crumble. That balance, discipline wrapped in a quiet kind of care, stirred something I didn't have a name for. The hardest part was the silence. Elevators, late afternoons when the office thinned out, the pause before she answered a question. In those spaces, I felt the weight of her nearness. The hum of the lights above, the scent of her perfume, subtle, not overdone, something clean and elegant, wrapped around me. I would stand a foot away and still feel like she was closer than anyone had ever been. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was in my head, that she probably didn't think twice about that warning. Maybe it was a test, a way of keeping me sharp. But then there were the moments that made me wonder. One afternoon, she leaned over to point out an error on a report. Her sleeve brushed my arm, just barely, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. She didn't react. She didn't even seem to notice, but I did. I noticed the warmth of the fabric, the faint pressure of her presence, and the fact that for a second, I forgot what she was saying. She moved on quickly, sliding the report back into the stack, her expression as composed as ever. But I sat there with my pulse racing, realizing I couldn't keep pretending this was just professional. At night, lying awake, I replayed every glance, every word. Did she know the effect she had on me? Or was I reading into something that wasn't there? The distance between us wasn't physical. It was something else. A fragile, invisible barrier neither of us seemed willing to cross. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more I realized how badly I wanted to. It was late when I found her. The office had gone quiet hours earlier, the kind of silence that settles over empty spaces after the last door clicks shut. I'd stayed behind to finish a report, mostly because I didn't want to go home with my thoughts still circling. On my way to the copier, I noticed the break room light glowing faintly. Curious, I stepped inside. She was there, seated at one of the small round tables, her coat draped loosely over the back of the chair. A half-empty mug sat in front of her, steam long gone, and she had her head resting lightly in one hand. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked tired. Not the usual sharp, untouchable figure I'd grown used to, but something softer, more human. When she lifted her eyes and noticed me, I expected her usual steady composure. Instead, she smiled faintly, almost apologetically. Didn't think anyone was still here. I could say the same about you, I said, trying to keep my tone easy. She let out a breath, not quite a sigh but close. Deadlines don't exactly care about the time of night. Then, after a pause, she added, sometimes it feels like neither do I. There was something in her voice, quiet, almost fragile, that pulled me into the chair across from her without a second thought. We talked, at first about work, but it slipped quickly into other things. She mentioned how exhausting it was to always be the one in control, how people assumed she never made mistakes, never cracked under pressure. The truth is, she admitted, tracing a finger idly along the rim of her mug, sometimes I feel like I'm just holding everything together by threads. And if one breaks, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I listened, really listened. The hum of the vending machine filled the spaces between her words, and in those silences, I could feel the weight she carried, the same weight I'd never seen her let slip during the day. When she finally looked back at me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen, she said, "You're quieter than most. That's rare." Before I could answer, she reached out, almost absent-mindedly, and her hand touched my forearm. Just a light contact, a brief press of warmth against my skin. But it sent a current through me, sharp and undeniable. My chest tightened, not just from the touch itself, but from what it meant. She was letting the guard down, even if only for a second. Her hand slipped away as quickly as it had come, and she straightened in her chair, reclaiming that composed exterior. But for me, the moment lingered. I walked back to my desk later that night with the memory of her touch still burning in my skin. And for the first time, I wondered if the distance between us wasn't only in my imagination. If maybe, just maybe, she felt it too. The mistake was small. At least, I thought it was. A number misplaced in a report, buried deep enough that it might have gone unnoticed if she hadn't been the one to check it. But she always noticed. Always. She called me into her office that afternoon, the door clicking shut behind me with a quiet finality that made the air feel heavier. I braced myself for a lecture, maybe worse. She didn't start right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, studying me with that unreadable calm. The report sat neatly on her desk, one page turned outward like evidence. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she raised a hand slightly, stopping me before I could speak. Her voice was soft, almost too soft. "Do you remember what I told you the other week?" My throat tightened. Of course I remembered. I'd been carrying those words around like a secret weight. "One more mistake," she said slowly, "and you'll belong to me." There it was again. The warning. The promise. Whatever it was, it wrapped itself around me the way her gaze did. Quiet, deliberate, impossible to shake. I swallowed hard. I guess this is the mistake then. For the first time, I saw her smile. Not wide, not careless, but a faint curve at the edge of her lips. She closed the folder and set it aside, as though the error didn't matter anymore. "Looks like it is." I waited for her verdict, my pulse pounding, but instead of handing down punishment, she stood and walked to the shelf behind her desk. When she returned, she placed another file in front of me. "You'll stay with me this week. Extra work. Every detail done perfectly. Consider it part of your belonging." She said it so casually, but the words struck deeper than they should have. Belonging. To her. That week blurred into long evenings in her office, just the two of us working side by side. At first, it was strictly business, sorting documents, revising reports, reviewing numbers until my head spun. But as the nights went on, something shifted. I noticed the small things, the way her voice softened when it was just us, the way she leaned closer when showing me something on the screen, her shoulder brushing mine, neither of us pulling away. Papers would spread across her desk, and we'd both reach for the same sheet, our fingers grazing, the contact lingering just a second too long before she withdrew. Each moment felt like a thread pulling tighter between us. Neither of us acknowledged it, but it was there, in the silence between our words, in the warmth that filled the room long after the rest of the office had gone cold. By the end of the week, I realized something. Her punishment wasn't punishment at all. It was proximity, time, and I wasn't sure if she had planned it that way, or if it had simply happened. Either way, I no longer wanted to escape it. The office at night had a different rhythm. During the day, it was a place of constant motion, phones ringing, footsteps echoing, conversations spilling over cubicle walls. But when the sun dropped and the city lights flickered on beyond the glass, it felt like another world entirely. That night, it was just the two of us. Papers spread across her desk, the low hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. She sat close beside me, her chair angled toward mine, pointing out edits on a file glowing on the computer screen. Our hands moved almost in sync, hers reaching for the keyboard, mine shifting a document aside. At one point, my fingers brushed against hers. A small, ordinary contact. Except this time, neither of us moved. Her hand rested beneath mine, warm, steady, and I felt the faintest catch of her breath. She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the quiet stillness of someone holding back. Something in me gave way. I couldn't keep it in anymore. My voice came out lower than I intended, almost a whisper. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said that morning. That got her attention. She turned her head, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Not the polished control she wore so well, but something raw, uncertain. You don't know what you're asking for, she said softly. Her words should have been a wall, but they sounded more like a confession. I swallowed, my pulse hammering in my ears. I'm not asking for anything. I just can't ignore it anymore. I can't ignore you. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. She looked at me, and the layers of her, the boss, the perfectionist, the untouchable professional, all seemed to fall away in that moment. What was left was just her. A woman sitting beside me, afraid of what this might mean, and maybe wanting it just as much as I did. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief second, as though steadying herself, then let out a breath she'd been holding. You're too young, she murmured, not as a dismissal, but as though she was trying to convince herself. I leaned forward, careful, not pushing but refusing to retreat. Maybe, but that doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change what's here, between us. She held my gaze then, unblinking, and I saw it. The desire she'd been hiding, the pull she'd been resisting. Her hand, the one beneath mine, curled slightly, gripping instead of lying still. That single movement felt louder than any declaration. The city lights outside bathed the room in a soft glow, wrapping us in a silence that was no longer empty but charged, alive. And in that silence, I knew we'd both crossed a line we couldn't step back from. The following nights felt different. Once a line is crossed, even silently, the air between two people changes. It carries a weight you can't pretend isn't there. We stayed late again, though neither of us mentioned why. Maybe the work was enough of an excuse, or maybe we both knew it wasn't the real reason. She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed from time to time. Each accidental touch felt intentional, even though neither of us admitted it. At one point, I looked up from the papers to find her watching me. Not with the critical sharpness she usually wore in the office, but with something softer, almost searching. I held her gaze, and she didn't look away. The silence stretched, thick with all the things we hadn't said. My chest tightened. Before I could think better of it, I reached out and touched her hand. Not bold, not forceful, just a steady, gentle contact, as if asking for permission. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her fingers lay still beneath mine, cool against my skin. Then, slowly, deliberately, she curled them around my hand, her grip firm but trembling faintly. The shift was small, but it felt monumental, like a door opening after standing shut for far too long. Her eyes softened, but I could see the battle playing out behind them. "This isn't simple," she whispered. "I'm older. I'm your boss. They wouldn't understand." Her voice carried all the hesitation, the fear, the walls she'd built to keep herself safe. And I respected that. I wanted to reassure her, not to push. "I don't care what they think," I said quietly. "I don't want you to be anything other than yourself. That's enough for me." Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled, long and slow, and then she let her head rest lightly against my shoulder. The weight of it undid me. Her hair brushed my cheek, soft against my skin, and I could feel the gentle rhythm of her breath. My chest ached with the intimacy of it, the simple trust of her leaning into me after holding herself so distant for so long. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The quiet of the office wrapped around us, the hum of the city beyond the windows fading into nothing. For that moment, it felt like the world had shrunk down to just the two of us, sitting close, sharing a silence that meant more than words ever could. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes met mine with a steadiness that was new. Not the authority of a boss, but the vulnerability of a woman allowing herself to be seen. Her fingers were still intertwined with mine, and she didn't let go. And in that fragile stillness, I realized she wasn't just letting me in. She was choosing me. Weeks passed, and somehow everything between us shifted without ever being spoken aloud. She was still my boss, still sharp and commanding during the day, but beneath the surface there was something else now. Something quiet and steady that bound us together in the spaces no one else could see. We didn't rush it. We didn't have to. The long evenings became routine, our closeness no longer strange but natural. I'd catch her watching me sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression softening in a way no one else in the office would ever recognize. And when our hands brushed while passing papers, she no longer pulled away. One evening, when the week had finally ended and the city was alive with its Friday night hum, she surprised me. Instead of retreating into her office with the stack of files she usually carried home, she closed her drawer, slipped on her coat, and said, "Walk with me." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any command she had ever given. We stepped out into the cool night air. The sidewalks glistened faintly from a light rain earlier, and the glow of the street lamps gave the city a hushed, almost intimate feel. For the first few blocks, we didn't speak. Our shoulders brushed now and then, and with each step, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Finally, without fanfare, her hand slipped into mine. No hesitation, no glance to check if anyone was watching. Just the quiet, decisive touch of someone who had finally stopped fighting what she felt. Her hand was warm, firm, but there was a faint tremor in it too, like she was still testing the ground beneath her feet. I squeezed gently, steadying her, letting her know I was right there. She laughed then, a small, breathy sound that startled me because it was so unguarded. "You realize," she said, glancing at me with that same curve of a smile I'd only seen once before. "This means you really do belong to me now." I couldn't help smiling back. "Only if you belong to me too." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was light, easy, filled with the simple rhythm of our steps and the quiet certainty of what we'd both finally admitted. We kept walking, no destination in mind, just the city stretching out before us. And for the first time since her warning, those words that had haunted me, pulled me, changed me, I understood what she had meant. Belonging wasn't about control. It wasn't about punishment or power. It was about this, two people carrying each other's weight, choosing to stay close even when the world might not understand. Her hand tightened around mine, and I knew then that whatever came next, whatever challenges or judgments we'd face, it wouldn't matter. Because she was right. I did belong to her. And she, finally, belonged to me.